A quiet Detroit evening, an empty street, and John Cena's routine jog, until a masked stranger steps into a 24-hour pharmacy. What happens behind that door changes everything. Ready to find out? Hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss a second. The sun dipped low over the Detroit skyline, casting a golden-orange haze over rooftops and storefronts. The streets, once busy with rush-hour traffic and voices, had begun to quiet. People made their way home, lights flickered on behind windows, and the air carried a faint chill. It was a time when the city slowed, exhaled, and emptied, and that was exactly when John Cena liked to run. Dressed in a gray hoodie, blue athletic shorts, and bright neon sneakers, John moved at a steady pace down the sidewalk. He didn't wear headphones. He liked to hear the city, the hum of traffic, the scrape of leaves against concrete, the occasional bark of a dog behind a fence. For him, these runs weren't just workouts, they were resets. He didn't need fans, cameras, or a gym. He needed the sound of his own breath and a city winding down. Tonight, his route took him through the West Side, a quieter, older part of town where small shops lined the streets, and the neon of a 24-hour pharmacy flickered uncertainly in the dimming light. He slowed as he approached an empty bus stop and took a seat on the cold metal bench. His chest rose and fell evenly. He pulled a towel from his pocket and wiped the sweat from his neck, then took a swig of water. Across the street stood the pharmacy. Its interior lights glowed against the gathering dusk. From his spot, he could see two young women working behind the counter, both black, one with long braids, the other with her hair pulled into a tight bun. They moved with casual ease, chatting as they restocked shelves and tapped at the register. A normal evening, peaceful. But then he noticed a man standing near the entrance of the pharmacy. At first, John thought nothing of it. The guy could have just been another customer. But something about his body language made John sit up straighter. The man was pacing slightly, stepping forward, then pulling back. He was wearing a dark hoodie, black jeans, and a balaclava-style mask that covered most of his face. Not a COVID mask, not a scarf, a full face covering that
immediately raised questions. His gloved hands fidgeted near his waistline. John narrowed his eyes. The man turned, scanning the street. John dropped his gaze, pretending to be preoccupied with his water bottle. When he looked back up, the man was already moving toward the door of the pharmacy. His hand disappeared beneath his jacket. A warning bell rang in John's head. He'd been around enough real situations to know when something was wrong. He stood slowly from the bench, pocketing his towel, and crossed the street at a casual pace. He didn't sprint, didn't shout. Drawing attention might escalate things. As he approached the window, he peered inside just as the man stepped through the door. John's eyes scanned the scene through the glass. The man inside shouted. Though muffled, John could make out enough. "Open the register, now!" One of the women stepped back, alarmed. The other raised her hands. "We don't have much. Everything's digital now. Cards, apps. There's no cash here." "Liar," the man snapped. "Don't play dumb with me, girl. Open it or I swear." He pulled a knife from under his coat. Not a pocket blade, but a long one, nearly 7 inches. It gleamed under the overhead lights. John could see the woman trembling. The one with braids had tears in her eyes. She pointed at the register and opened the drawer. It was nearly empty. Coins, a few small bills. "I told you," she whispered. "There's barely anything here." "You think I'm stupid?" the man barked. "You think I don't know your kind? You're just trying to stall me. Move!" John clenched his jaw. His thumb hovered over the 911 call screen on his phone. He pressed the call button, but didn't wait for an operator to speak. He hung up instantly, knowing the signal would still go through with GPS. He took a breath. Then he pushed open the pharmacy door. A soft chime rang. The man spun around, startled. "Hey," John said casually, voice calm and steady. "You guys got anything for migraines? This headache's killing me." The girls froze. The man blinked, knife still raised. His chest heaved. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking. "Don't move," he shouted at John. "Stay right there." John raised both hands slowly, like someone trying to defuse a wild animal. Okay, relax, man. I'm just here for some Advil." "Back up," the man barked. "Back the hell up now." John took a step forward. "Easy. I'm not here for you. I just want to grab some pills and go. That cool?" "One more step and I'll gut you," the man roared, his voice cracking. John paused, then slowly, deliberately, took another step. The knife trembled. John's eyes didn't leave his. He saw it now. The man wasn't just angry, he was out of control. High or drunk, or both. "You're hurting, man," John said, low. "I can see that, but this isn't gonna fix it." "Shut up," the man screeched, waving the knife wildly. "You don't know me." "No," John said, "but I know this kind of pain." And then he moved. Fast, faster than most could follow. He lunged forward, deflecting the knife arm with one hand and driving his shoulder into the man's chest. They crashed against a shelf, medicine bottles flying. The blade grazed John's side, a sharp flash of pain, but he didn't stop. He pivoted, twisted the man's wrist, and with a sudden movement, slammed him to the ground using a classic wrestling takedown. The man groaned, stunned. John ripped the belt from his own shorts and bound the attacker's hands behind his back in 3 swift moves. Blood soaked through his shirt at the ribs, but he stayed kneeling, pressing the man into the floor with a knee on his back. The 2 girls stared, frozen. "You okay?" John asked, breathing hard. One nodded, wide-eyed. The other grabbed a first aid kit and ran toward him. "You're bleeding." "I've had worse," he muttered, wincing as she applied pressure. "The cops are coming," said the girl with braids. I pressed the panic button and called again. "They're on their way." Outside, the sound of approaching sirens grew louder. "You saved us," she whispered. John didn't answer. He just sat there, hand still on the tied man's shoulder, blood dripping from his side, waiting in silence as red and blue lights painted the windows. The sirens wailed louder as 2 black and white patrol cruisers pulled up outside the pharmacy, tires screeching against the curb. Red and blue lights flooded the storefront, flashing across shelves and the faces of the stunned employees inside. The 2 young women stood behind the counter, their hands still trembling. One held gauze to John Cena's side as he knelt beside the subdued assailant, keeping him pinned with a calm grip and steady pressure. The front door slammed open. "Hands where we can see them," barked the lead officer, his gun raised, the other close behind with baton drawn. John didn't move. He raised his hands slowly and clearly, then nodded toward the man beneath him. "He's your guy," he said flatly. "Knife's on the floor, hands are tied." The officers paused for half a second, confused by what they saw. A man in gym clothes holding down a masked figure, and 2 frightened women pointing at John. "That's him," one officer said, stepping forward, misreading the direction. "Cuff him." "No," the woman with braids shouted, leaping from behind the counter. "Not him. He's not the robber. He stopped it. He saved us." The officers hesitated. One gestured to the attacker and cuffed him quickly, while the other kept a wary eye on John. "He came in after it started," the second girl added, pointing at the bound man. "This guy had a knife. He was robbing us. John, this man, he stopped him, even got cut doing it." The tension in the room began to drain. One officer finally relaxed his stance and holstered his weapon. "EMS is en route," the other said, checking the attacker's pulse. "Guy's high on something. Twitchy. Probably meth." John finally sat back, his hand pressed to the wound on his side. Blood soaked the gauze, but the bleeding had slowed. He took a deep breath. His pulse was steady now. The adrenaline was fading. "You all right, sir?" one officer asked, kneeling beside him. "I'll live," John muttered. The EMTs arrived minutes later, cutting away his torn shirt and cleaning the wound. One of them let out a soft whistle. "Could have been worse. Looks like a clean graze. Inch deeper, and we're talking internal." John exhaled through gritted teeth. "Just tape it up. I've had worse in the ring." "You a fighter?" the EMT asked with a smirk. "Something like that," John replied, giving him a sideways glance. As they patched him up, the attacker was hauled to his feet by officers. The man mumbled incoherently, his body slack as if the fight had drained out of him completely. "You're gonna regret this," he spat. John met his eyes. "Already forgot your name." As the police let him out in cuffs, the store was still bathed in flashing lights. The girls offered John a seat near the counter, one of them placing a small box of painkillers beside him. "For what it's worth," she said, "you didn't have to come in. You could have waited for the cops." "I know," John said quietly. She paused, then added, "Why did you?" John looked up at her. "Because no one else was moving." She didn't have a reply. She just nodded and sat beside him, the box of bandages still in her hands. The officer who had cuffed the attacker returned with a clipboard. "We'll need a full statement," he said. "Witnesses, too." "We'll give it," one of the girls said firmly. "He's not the criminal. He's the reason we're still standing." John winced as he adjusted his posture, the bandage pulling at his side. "Mind if I sit down for it?" The officer cracked a smile. "I'd be offended if you didn't." They took statements for the next hour. The store's security footage confirmed every word. The initial confusion cleared. The responding officers gave John nods of respect as they reviewed the footage, and one quietly said, "Hell of a move you pulled in there." John didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just nodded once. As the lights outside faded and the city began to settle back into its evening rhythm, the scene finally cleared. The girls, still shaken, handed John a sealed envelope from the pharmacy's first aid stash. "Something to keep the pain down," they said. He stood, adjusted the towel still looped around his neck, and turned toward the door. "Wait," the girl with the braids called. "What's your name?" He looked over his shoulder. "John," he said, "just John." And then he stepped back into the quiet night, a little slower than before, but upright. His side hurt, but it was manageable. The city was still and dark once more, but now it knew something it hadn't before. That even on the edge of violence, when fear filled the room, someone was willing to move. The buzz around the incident at the West Side Pharmacy started before sunrise. First, it was chatter among night shift staff. Then, it spread across employee group chats and store managers' emails. By noon the next day, the video had reached corporate headquarters. It wasn't a news story yet, but it had already become something heavier than rumor. It had become legend in motion. And at the center of it was a man no one had expected. John Cena sat on a hospital bed under the soft glare of fluorescent lights, wearing a thin gray patient shirt with a gauze pad taped to his ribs. The wound ached, not badly, but enough to keep him alert. He had refused anything stronger than basic painkillers. He didn't like feeling foggy. He preferred the edge. Pain, in the right measure, was grounding. A nurse had come in earlier to check his vitals and change the dressing. "You were lucky," she said softly. "People don't usually walk away from things like that with just a scratch." John had said nothing. He just nodded. He wasn't in the mood to process luck. On the bedside table was a plastic bag with his torn shirt, a bottle of ibuprofen, and a folded piece of paper with a handwritten message. It was from one of the pharmacy clerks, the girl with braids. "You didn't have to, but you did. Thank you." He looked at the note, then folded it again and tucked it into his jacket pocket. By early afternoon, hospital security received a call from someone claiming to be an executive from the pharmacy chain. A visitor was coming up, wanted to speak to Mr. Cena personally. John raised an eyebrow when the door opened. The man who stepped inside wore a tailored blazer and a clipped badge reading Walter Green, Director, MedBrite Pharmacies. He looked tired, like someone who had slept little and spoken to too many people that morning. "Mr. Cena," he said with a slight nod, "thank you for allowing me a moment." John gestured to the chair beside his bed. "Don't usually do interviews, if that's where this is going." Green shook his head. "No cameras, no headlines. I saw the footage. I've worked in this company for 12 years. Thought I'd seen everything. But watching someone run toward danger instead of away from it," he paused, "that rewired something in me." John said nothing, only studied him in silence. "We've had incidents before," Green continued. "Thefts, panic buttons, even armed threats. But this is the first time a stranger, someone unaffiliated, intervened like that. You got hurt, you saved lives, and you walked away without waiting for thanks." John exhaled through his nose. "Didn't do it for thanks." "I know," Green said. "That's why it matters." He reached into his coat and handed John a sealed envelope. "It's not a contract, just a letter from the company. We'd like to formally thank you and offer to cover any medical expenses. And there's a card in there from both the women who were working. They insisted." John took the envelope, nodded once, and placed it on the table unopened. Later that night, while sitting alone with a cup of water, he opened it. Inside was a short printed message from the MedBrite Executive Board, acknowledging his actions and extending their support. Attached was a handwritten card, 2 lines in different handwriting. "You were the only one who moved. I'll never forget that. My mom says heroes don't wear capes, but I think they wear gym shorts." John almost smiled. The following morning, the video began making rounds online. A night supervisor who had access to the store's security system shared it with a friend. That friend posted it on social media, along with a caption, "This man stopped an armed robbery, got stabbed doing it, and was almost mistaken for the criminal. Watch the whole thing." The footage showed everything clearly. The suspect's entry, the threats, the moment John entered, unarmed, calm, the confrontation, the takedown, the blood. It was all there. No editing, no background music, just raw surveillance with a timestamp and a silent message. This is what courage looks like when no one's watching. Within 24 hours, the video had 2 million views. Hashtags exploded, news outlets picked it up, talk shows requested interviews. Email the inquiries poured into John's management team, but he declined them all. At one point, an old friend from WWE called him and said, "You finally gave the world the realest match of your life, and you didn't even throw a punch for show." John only replied, "It wasn't a match, it was a choice." That week, the pharmacy saw an uptick in visits. Customers left flowers at the counter. Someone hung a banner outside reading, "Thank you to our hero." But John never returned. Not yet. He spent most of his recovery in quiet. No posts, no statements. When reporters knocked on the hospital doors, he simply asked the staff to say he was resting, which was true, but he was also thinking. He thought about how quickly people judged, how easily the narrative could have twisted if not for that camera. He thought about how the officers almost cuffed him. He thought about how many others weren't so lucky to have video on their side. One evening, just before his discharge, one of the pharmacy clerks arrived with a brown paper bag. She stood at the door, unsure if she should come in. "I'm not here for photos," she said. "Just wanted to give you this. It's not much." He took the bag, opened it. Inside was a plain black wristband with a single phrase stitched in white. "Move when it's hard." He looked at her, then at the bracelet, and slipped it over his hand. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm better now." "You scared that night?" "Yes," she whispered. He paused. "Me too." They didn't say much more. When she left, John leaned back against the stiff hospital bed. He closed his eyes, hand resting on the words around his wrist. There was something in that silence. Not relief, not pride, just something finished, and something else beginning. The air was cooler again, a soft breeze rolling down the familiar streets as the sky faded into its evening blues. A week had passed since the pharmacy incident, but the city seemed unchanged. The buildings still leaned against one another like tired shoulders, the sidewalks still cracked underfoot, and the distant hum of traffic still filled the silence between steps. But something had shifted. Not in the city, but in John Cena. He was out on his evening run again, this time slower, more thoughtful. The bandage on his side was smaller now, the pain dull and manageable. He moved with the same power but less urgency. His breath was steady and his thoughts quiet. As he rounded the corner near the pharmacy, he slowed and eventually came to a stop across the street. The familiar neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a dull glow across the pavement. Business as usual. The door swung open, and one of the clerks from that night stepped out. The one with the long braids. She spotted him immediately, her face lighting up with a genuine smile. She waved. John returned the wave with a slight nod, nothing grand. Just enough. She didn't call out or run to him. She just watched him as if confirming to herself that he was still real, still walking these streets. He gave a half smile and moved on. The street lights flicked on one by one. A few steps later, John passed an older man sitting on a stoop reading the local paper. The man looked up, then did a double take. "Ain't you that guy from the video?" he asked. "The one who took down that junkie?" John didn't break stride. "Nope. Just someone who wanted some Advil." The man chuckled and went back to reading. As the city dimmed and the wind picked up, John spotted a small figure across the road near a lamppost. A boy, maybe 12, sat hunched over, backpack slung beside him, rubbing his hands together. His jacket was too thin for the weather. John crossed the street. "You good?" he asked gently. The boy flinched, startled, but nodded quickly. "I'm fine. Just missed my bus. My mom's working. I was going home." "Where's home?" "Dexter and Elm." John glanced toward the darkening intersection. "That's a ways. Next bus'll take a bit." "I can wait," the boy said. "I do this a lot." John reached into his jacket and pulled out a small to-go cup with a plastic lid. "It's still warm. You drink coffee?" The boy shook his head. "Not really." John placed the cup beside him anyway. "Well, it's decaf. Tastes like cardboard, but warms your hands." They sat in silence, side by side on the edge of the sidewalk. A breeze rustled the wrappers near the curb. The boy looked over at him a few times, then finally asked, "Are you the guy? The one who stopped the robbery?" John stared ahead. "People stop things every day. Just depends who's watching." The boy didn't know what to say to that. He just sipped the coffee, holding the cup with both hands. A few minutes later, a city bus rumbled around the corner. The boy stood up and slung his backpack over one shoulder. "Thanks, mister," he mumbled. "Stay warm," John replied, watching him climb on board. As the bus pulled away and disappeared down the road, John stood alone once again. He looked back across the street at the pharmacy, its lights still glowing. The banner that had once read, "Thank you to our hero," was gone. Just a regular storefront now. He adjusted his wristband, the one the girl had given him. The words were worn now from sweat and weather. "Move when it's hard." He took a slow breath and turned toward home, his pace steady, his head up. There were no crowds waiting, no interviews, no medals, but there was peace in the quiet, not for what he had done, but for how he had done it. In a world where too many people wait for someone else to act, he had acted, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. One act of courage, no headlines, no spotlight, just the right choice at the right time. If this story moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. We read every comment.